Welcome to another edition of the Jerry Ratcliffe Show here at jerryratcliffe.com. We appreciate you tuning in, all the normal podcast platforms and YouTube. Appreciate the growing audience that we're getting. And want to thank, before we get started, want to thank our sponsors, the Good Feet store over at Stonefield, also the Aberdeen Barn, and Roback, one of America's fastest growing activewear companies based right here in Charlottesville. So go by and see them, all those good folks, and tell them Hootie sent you. This podcast might be a little premature because it's about next Tuesday's Virginia game at Memphis. Virginia obviously has a game on Saturday against Northeastern, and Memphis has a game Saturday against undefeated Clemson. Big game. So it's a big week for Penny Hardaway's Memphis Tigers, who are 7-2, taking on number 13 Clemson Saturday, like I said, and then Virginia on Tuesday. And we're going to bring in someone who I have great respect for. I met him when he was a budding journalist with the Washington Post. I knew he was going to be a big time guy, and certainly has gone on to become that. And I have great admiration for his work and his work ethic, and just being an overall good guy. And let's bring him in now. Mark Giannotto, sports columnist and editor of the Memphis Commercial Appeal. He knows the Tigers pretty well. Welcome, Mark. Good to see you.
Hootie, thanks so much for the introduction. You're too kind. It's you're always great guy too. When I was on it feels like ages ago I was on the UVA beat, but it was only like I think it was like 8-9 years ago. My last year was kind of like the first year Tony really got things going. They got the 1 seed, lost to Michigan State in the Sweet 16, but I was really excited when I saw Memphis and Virginia were playing, given my history. But thanks for having me on the podcast. It's good to see and hear from you again and talk some Virginia hoops, and I can hopefully add some expertise on Memphis for the fans listening.
I believe you can, and I know you said you won't be at the game, but you're going to be assigned to a game in New Orleans. I guess.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that day in Memphis, for people's context in Virginia. Like, I actually think this 2-week period is about as busy as it's been in Memphis sports since I've been here. I've been here like 7 years at this point, almost. But that night, Memphis is hosting UVA, and at home in basketball. Ja Morant is going to return from his suspension in New Orleans. That's where I'll be, down in New Orleans for that. And then earlier that day, there's going to be a big piece of legislation likely passed, leading to major renovations at the football stadium here in Memphis, the old Liberty Bowl. So it's going to be a big day in Memphis sports on the 19th, that Tuesday, the 19th, for, in all regards. So, I mean, there's a lot of excitement about this Memphis basketball team this year and what they've done so far. And the Clemson game this weekend that you mentioned, and then followed by the UVA game, are, other than maybe the game they have against Florida Atlantic in league play, a rematch NCAA tournament, like the biggest home games on the schedule by far. And I could make the argument these two games will go a long way towards determining Memphis's seed in the NCAA tournament because of the realities of being in the American Athletic Conference. Memphis doesn't get that many opportunities like this. And so that's why they've played like a ridiculously hard non-conference schedule, but they have to, because the league just isn't that strong.
Yeah, I was checking that out a little bit. They've beaten Arkansas, Texas A&M, Michigan, VCU in overtime, and lost to Ole Miss and Villanova. That's a murderer's row right there.
Yeah, it's been when they play Clemson on Saturday, it will have been 30 days between home games for them, for
Wow.
Memphis. It's the longest a Memphis basketball team has gone between home games since the 1951-52 season. We looked it up. That season was in that road trip was the first time Memphis basketball ever took an airplane somewhere.
Really?
Apparently, yes. It's just
Wow.
but like this is if you want to get a sense of what the reality is for Memphis basketball, like this is the reality in the league they're in. Like Florida Atlantic is going to be good this year. But with Houston gone, with Cincinnati gone, SMU's soon going to be gone. They lost Louisville ages ago, used to be a big rival for them. Like this is what Penny Hardaway's decided, and I think he's right. Like they got to do their heavy lifting. It's a lot like, honestly, Gonzaga 10 years ago, where they would have to play these just a monster of a non-conference schedule because they knew they weren't going to get a lot of big time opportunities in non-conference or in conference play.
Wow.
And so that's the situation they're in. And it's tough because it's essentially you've got, especially with Memphis, Virginia's had transfers over the years, and obviously the transfer portal's changed things, but Penny has really leaned into transfers. I mean, this year's team, I believe there's only two guys left back from last year's group. Basically everyone else is new. And so they've had to come together really quickly because, usually like teams in the ACC or the Big 12 or the Big East, like, they can drop some games here early while they're figuring things out with all these new guys because of the modern era, and they can make up for it in conference play because there's a lot of big opportunities. Memphis doesn't have that luxury, and so they've had to come together quickly. And so far, there's been some hiccups. Like they probably should have won the Ole Miss game. That was a road game, but they probably should have won that one. They let that one slip away. But they're coming off right now as we record this a win at Texas A&M that was as impressive. It was the best they've looked all year. It was the most complete game they've played all year. But they went in and beat a ranked Texas A&M team, and frankly controlled the game. The final score really isn't indicative. Like they won, it was closer. The final score was closer than it actually was. Like they controlled that game, and so they look to me right now. This is Penny Hardaway's 6th season as head coach, I believe. They look as good as any team he's had. Maybe like right now, they feel like they're in a better spot, I would say, through 10 games than any team he's had. Maybe the year they had James Wiseman, because 10 games in, you still thought you were going to get James Wiseman back, even though he was sitting out. But obviously that year kind of went to hell. And then both because of James Wiseman leaving and then also the pandemic hitting. But this looks like certainly an NCAA tournament team, but also, one of the narratives here in Memphis is Penny, in Memphis with the history they have in basketball, coaches are judged on, how often did you get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament or the second week of the NCAA tournament? Sweet 16 appearances. They've had 3 different Final Four teams here since the 1970s. And so for Penny, one of the big narratives is, he has not advanced past the first week of the NCAA tournament. And this feels like a team that is capable of doing that.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Just a little bit I've read about them, but yeah, that Texas A&M game is a good measuring stick for both programs. I think Virginia had them in here a couple of weeks ago and beat them pretty soundly as well.
Yeah.
At that point, A&M was ranked pretty high, and everybody was surprised that Virginia had its way with Buzz, an old familiar face. But I think Virginia's kind of in the same boat in terms of, and maybe for the first time ever, they've had to go to the transfer portal heavily. At one point last spring, Mark, they were down to 4 guys on the Virginia roster, which is really rare because they had some guys moved on, graduated, and then I guess maybe 3 guys did that, and then some other guys transferred, so that they were down to 4 people. One of those was a spot held for Reese Bigman in case he
Mm,
decided to come back, which he did.
yeah.
Thank goodness for them. Um, so yeah, it's been kind of a strange um, year in that respect for Virginia because he brought in all these new pieces, new faces, and they've had to blend together with what was coming back. And so far, they've done a pretty good job of it.
Mhm.
They looked pretty bad against Wisconsin. They got physically beat up in that game, but they've been pretty good in all their
And
other contests.
they're very similar. Like Memphis laid in it. Memphis went to the Bahamas over Thanksgiving, beat Michigan and Arkansas, and then laid an egg against Villanova in the championship game. Played a horrible first half and really was never in the game because of that. Um, but yeah, kind of similar that way too. They had one real clunker on there so far. But yeah, it's funny. I was with Penny a few weeks ago alone. Like I was doing a story with him, and I was asking him like how this. I go, how did you know Tony Bennett well? Like when you guys played in the NBA, because they were playing in the NBA around the same time. And he
Mhm.
was like, no, not really. Like I didn't know Tony Bennett at all. Like not well at all. But I think Penny, contrary, one of the misperceptions about Penny nationally as a coach is like you remember him as a player and how flashy he was, the little Penny stuff, and
Mhm.
all the highlights, whether it was with Shaq or just him, because he was such a dynamic offensive player. But as a coach, he is like a defense first coach. And I think I remember it from his first couple years. Like, I think he really admires the way Virginia plays defense. Like, I think I think that, and the sense I got from Penny is that this was like he wanted to go play. He wanted to get Virginia, and from what my understanding is, he's been trying to get it for a couple years this series, and finally, the scheduling, the dates worked out and all that. But I sense a real admiration for the way Virginia plays defense and how Tony coaches defense, Tony Bennett from Penny Hardaway. Because I figured they knew each other maybe from NBA stuff, but that's
Yeah,
not what it was. It was more. Like I said, I think Penny has watched Virginia, like especially that national championship year. That was his first year as the head coach, and I think he watched that team and kind of admired the way they played defense.
that was a great defensive team for sure. This one won't compare to that one at this point. It might eventually get there, but they've got so many new guys trying to learn the pack line that it holds them
Mhm.
back a little bit. But
Yeah.
I could see where that would be a mutual respect kind of thing
Now,
where he would want to see what it's like in real time.
what will be fascinating about this game when they play is it'll be a total contrast in styles. I mean, Memphis is one of the fastest paced teams in the country. They always are. And while Penny is defense first, his defense is a hounding pressure. Like it's not 40 minutes of hell like Nolan Richardson, but
Mm,
honestly, like at times it can be as close to it's the closest thing in the modern era to that at times. He does it more. This team he has pressed less, much like Tony. It's like because there's so many new guys, teaching the press has been a process, and so they haven't been great at it. But in general, they play like they're about creating turnovers and creating havoc, and like a little bit like that old, not quite what VCU was with Shaka, but like
right.
in that same vein, like that is how they've always played defense. They're switching every screen, all that stuff. And then you've got on the other side Virginia, who's really good defensively in a completely opposite way, where they're gonna make you feel like you're in mud, and you're gonna have to hit tough outside shots if they're not gonna let you just get into the paint, and so they're gonna want the thing that's gonna be interesting about this game is typically Tony Bennett coach teams don't get sped up. Even
Right.
if someone wants to play at a fast tempo, they don't, ultimately they're not going to let you do it. And that's what this game's going to be about. If it's played at Virginia's tempo, if it's in the 50s or 60s, I like Virginia's chances in the game. If you're talking 70s and 80s, I like Memphis's chances in the game.
Yeah, no
That's
doubt.
kind of how I look at it.
No doubt. And this is a little more athletic Virginia team than normal. They've got some guys who can run if they get the opportunity to. And he's essentially starting a three guard, sometimes 4 guard lineup. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that kind of defensive pressure for sure.
And then the wild card for Memphis right now, because this is Memphis, so things it's always crazy here with Memphis basketball. There's always something wild going on. So right now, the guy they brought in to be their starting center, Jordan Brown, he was the Lou Henson Award winner as the best mid-major player in the country last year at Louisiana. Well, things didn't go well the first 5 or 6 games. He looks like a bad fit a little bit. You know, he's more of like, honestly, he would fit a lot better on a UVA. Like he playing up and down the court has not fit him well. He's a true back to the basket guy. And, you know, it hadn't worked. They didn't necessarily want him to leave, but he's mysteriously showed up. It was announced as sick a week ago, and he's been sick since then. There's been some anonymous reporting that suggests that he's not sick. He's, leaving the team. Penny, as of right now, is still saying he's sick. But in the meantime, he took a commitment from Naquan Tomlin, the recently dismissed Kansas State center.
Right.
And he is eligible to play this season. The question is, what game will be his first game? They have not yet officially announced the commitment. Penny has indicated, without specifically referencing Naquan Walton, that he won't be playing against Clemson on Saturday. I suspect he also won't play in the UVA game because it'll be too quick to get him. He's got to get his, I think Kansas State has to send through his graduation because he graduated from Kansas State, and then he's got to be admitted to Memphis. And then, you'd think he'd want to practice at least once with the team before you use him.
You would hope so.
But that is a wild card in this game. We're recording this on a Thursday, and by Tuesday, that's a long ways off in the world of Memphis basketball. There could be a chance Naquan Tomlin, who was a very good player on that Kansas State team last year that went to the Elite Eight,
right?
He's coming here to be the starting center for Memphis. It's just a question of what game will he start will it begin his tenure as the starting center. My guess is it won't be for this UVA game, but you never know.
That's an interesting turn of events right there.
Yeah.
This David Jones guy must be pretty darn good though. He's averaging 20 points a game.
He's been the biggest kind of the transfers, the guy. He was good at St. John's last year. He was a pretty good player at St. John's last year. I don't think anyone expected what he's been so far. I mean, he put up 34 against Arkansas. He put up 36 the other day against Texas A&M. He is one of those guys. Now, he takes some shots where you're just like, oh, my God. But, he can just get hot. And he's big. He's 6'6", and he can take it to the cup. He can shoot from 3. Now, he's a little streaky from there. And he's also leading them in rebounding. He's their leading steals guy. I mean, he's playing as of right now like an All-American, to be quite honest.
Wow.
Playing really well. And then the difference lately is Javon Quinterly, who you might remember was playing at Alabama the last few years, started at Villanova. He's 25 now. This is an old team. This Memphis team, the average age in the starting lineup is 23. This is an old Memphis team.
That's an
old 22 and change or something like that. All these guys playing for Memphis in the starting lineup are old guys who are in there. I mean, Caleb Mills is playing for this team. You have Virginia fans for Caleb Mills.
Yeah.
And so he's coming off the bench for these guys right now. So, but Javon Quinterly, the point guard, has played really well the last couple games for them. And when he's playing well, they look really good. When they lost to Ole Miss, he played pretty bad. When they lost to Villanova, he played pretty bad. And so he's been a little up and down. And then they've got Jaquan Walton, who was Wichita State's leading scorer last year. He hasn't even really played that well yet this year. But he's another guy to look out for offensively for them. They've got a lot of guys who have played a lot of college basketball on this team. And are, but Jones has been the biggest kind of revelation because I don't think anyone was expecting him to be the dude he has seemed he is so far this season. He can really fill it up. He's just one of those guys who can fill it up.
At 6'6", it'll be interesting to see who Virginia puts on him, Reese Beekman or maybe Ryan Dunn, who's a little bit bigger, but Beekman usually gets the number one scorer from the other team, and he's ACC Defensive Player of the Year. So
yeah, that'll be a fun matchup because I mean I do think if you're going by prospects, like Memphis has a lot of really talented guys, really guys who played a lot of college basketball. I don't know if there's an NBA player on the team, to be clear. Like there's a lot of guys who are going to make money playing basketball but frankly, there's a lot of guys already making money playing basketball on Memphis's roster with NIL. But a lot of guys who are going to make a lot of money, like playing overseas and things like that. But there's no one who's the prospect Beekman is on this team, ultimately. Most of them are fringe NBA guys, your classic, really good college basketball players. And like, ultimately you can put together a really good team with just a bunch of guys like Memphis has. But Beekman, at least based on like who's going to play who's an NBA prospect, Beekman is going to be the best prospect in this game.
Actually, Ryan Dunn might be because he's already been projected as a potential lottery pick next year, and he's just
there you go.
He's just starting his sophomore year. So
that is the difference. Like Virginia does have some legitimate NBA guys, whereas I would not say like maybe David Jones. Like there'll be, David Jones is going to play in the G League. I don't know if he'll ever play in the, and maybe some of these guys will get cups of coffee in the NBA or whatever. But I don't think any of them project as draft picks on Memphis's roster right now.
Yeah. That is an old roster, though. That's about as old a roster as I can remember in college basketball.
It's
recent years.
I mean, you got Quinterly's 25. Caleb Mills has, been playing forever. This is his third school. David Jones, this is his third school. Jaquan Walton, this is his third school.
Wow.
Jordan Brown, he won't probably play, but this was his fourth school.
It may not be his last, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's the weird thing about his situation is I don't think he can go transfer somewhere else. He's like at eligibility and all that. So,
wow.
And then they've got, then Penny's two sons are also on the team. Ashton is the better of the two. He's a freshman, but he plays. And he's had some big shooting games. He's been a little, typical freshman kind of here and there, but he can provide a spark with his shooting because he doesn't have Penny's athleticism, but he has Penny's length and he's got Penny's IQ and he can really shoot it. So he's an interesting guy for down the line, but even this season, he's been pretty good for them. And then, down low, if they don't have Tomlin by the time that game arrives, one area where they're a little deficient right now is with Jordan Brown not playing. They don't have a lot of depth in the front court right now. And I think, for instance, ahead of this Clemson game, there's some concern that PJ Hall will expose that when they play Clemson on Saturday, because they really only have two actual bigs, and one of them is like a 6'7" undersized big, Nick Jourdain. But top to bottom, it's a pretty good roster, and I think it's going to be a really good game. I think it's it's a tournament style type of game. Feels like a game you could see in the second round of the NCAA tournament is what it feels like. That's what this one feels like, Virginia-Memphis.
Yeah, that's what we were thinking on this end. That it has all the appeal of an NCAA tournament game. I imagine the atmosphere at Memphis's arena is pretty intense.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like they're really, I think the atmosphere this Saturday against Clemson is going to be electric, because it's their first home game in 30 days. They're really pumping it up. It's a Saturday afternoon game. Be interesting if they beat Clemson. I mean, it'll be, it does coincide, overlap with the Ja game, but the Grizzlies really stink right now, record wise. So, but it's an interesting atmosphere because you're playing in an NBA arena.
Right.
It's FedEx Forum. They play where the Grizzlies play. But it can get really loud in there. It's a tough place to play when there are a lot of people, and I expect there'll be a good crowd for that UVA game. Now, it's not that much bigger than JPJ. I mean, that seats what, like 14, 15,000.
Yeah.
FedEx Forum seats like 17, 18,000. So it's not that much bigger, so to speak. But I think it'll be, I don't know. Has Virginia played a big road game so far?
Not a true road game. Just they played in that Thanksgiving tournament down in Florida, but
So
I
this will
think
probably be their first true road environment. Like this will be a pretty, when this will be equivalent to an ACC road in terms of environment, I would say.
yeah,
They're pretty passionate about the Tigers here in Memphis. Until the Grizzlies got here, this was the pro team in town,
right.
and still for a lot of people, the Tiger, it is something that brings together the community in ways that transcend a lot of different dynamics in Memphis. I mean, frankly, Tiger basketball is credited with post Martin Luther King getting assassinated here, that 72-73 team that went to the Final Four. Like, a lot of people credit that team that season with like helping not heal wounds, but like it was really the first time the black and white communities in Memphis came back together, if you will, after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated here. Like,
I'd forgotten.
it has a lot of deep meaning in this city. Tiger basketball does. And that's part of why Penny's the coach, honestly. Like, he's from Memphis. He doesn't need to be doing this. But he's got,
Yeah.
he didn't need to be living in Memphis even, but he's chose to because there is a lot of pride in this place. That is, really endearing, honestly. Frankly, it's part of why I've been here for as long as I've been here, is that the people here, especially the sports fans, there's just a deep pride about their teams. And they support, even though Memphis has been left on the outside looking in conference realignment and all this stuff, like the passion you can feel it. I mean, like, heck, you can just see it in the way Memphis operates as, even though it's in the American Athletic Conference, you compare their budget, the basketball program's budget, it compares to anyone in the country. Like, basketball this is one of the few schools in the country that treats basketball, frankly, basketball is a higher priority than football at Memphis. And
Yeah.
so, and frankly, it's one of the few cities in the South where basketball is probably bigger than football. And so, I think there's a lot of excitement about this particular team too, because of the way they've started this year. And I think it'll be a really good environment for both these games, the Clemson and UVA games.
That speaks well of Penny, and I think most people hold him in a pretty high regard. And I noticed, just looking at some of your stuff, that when he was suspended and it was watching one of the games in a bar and let you watch the game with him. I don't know a lot of coaches would do that. So
yeah, I did not think he was going to let me do it either. I just asked it. It was like one of those, hey, what's the worst he could do? Say no, and then I asked and he said yes. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, it was funny. He watched at a sports bar the 3 games he was suspended for. Look, he's made some mistakes. He's made, like, ultimately he was when he first took the job, he was even though he's not young, he was young in coaching years and like had never worked in a college program before. Like, there's been some stuff that has happened very clearly. I mean, the Wiseman stuff was a total zoo. It like, it just was, and the way it was handled, both, maybe it wasn't his fault. It was more administration fault, but like the fact that they had to go through that whole 3-year process when it probably could have been avoided if you just did what every other program would have done if a player was ruled ineligible. Whatever. But in terms of Memphis, for this moment in time where the transfer portal and NIL are so important, like, I just can't, like, are there better in-game coaches than Penny? Yeah, there probably are. And he's getting better every year.
Mhm.
But in terms of like where Memphis is positioned, I can't imagine a better coach from like Memphis if could go get a better coach for them than Penny Hardaway. Like yes, there is until he goes and wins in March, that he is going to have to deal with the knock nationally of, well, he can go get players, but like, ultimately Memphis can't really, Memphis will fall short. They can't hold, they don't ultimately measure up against the elite on the court. And you're seeing it frankly reflected in, like Memphis probably should be ranked and they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like given their resume, like I don't know many teams that have won the number of, like they've won at Missouri, at A&M, at VCU, beat Michigan, beat Arkansas, and their only two losses are a championship game in the Bahamas to Villanova and at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is undefeated right now.
That sounds like a top 25 team to me.
Yeah, and so but I think there is a certain bias, partly because of how the first few years went, where Penny was getting these high profile recruiting classes and then not doing anything or not doing what people thought he should be doing with them. And over the last 2 years, really since that Amani Bates year with Amani Bates and Jalen Duren 2 years ago, he made the conscious decision. You listen, I'll have a freshman here or a freshman there, but I'm going to go to the transfer portal and get these older veteran guys. And it's worked. Last year, he had Kendrick Davis, and that team, frankly, is one bad bounce away from, they beat Florida Atlantic in that NCAA tournament game. That could be them going to the Final Four with the way the bracket's set up. At the very least, they're probably going to the Sweet 16. But unfortunately, they had a one bad turnover cost them at the end of the game, and they lose the game. But I think as you watch him, he's definitely gotten better as a coach over the years, and I think he's a pretty good coach. And I think for Memphis's purposes, probably the best kind of coach Memphis could have right now in this moment, where like, you know what, every year I'm not worried about Penny going and getting players. Like he's going to go get some guys. Like he's proven that.
Yeah.
And, ultimately there's a belief that, he'll get him over the top eventually in March. And then, ultimately he's beloved here. I mean, he's, the prodigal son in a lot of ways in Memphis. And so I've made the statement before, I don't think he'll ever get fired. It'll be like he'll leave, he'll decide to leave or whatever. They won't fire Penny Hardaway. They fired Larry Finch back in '96, who was Penny's coach, who was the star of that 72-73 team that went to the national championship game. They fired it, and it's been looked upon as like a terrible, terrible decision, just in terms of like, he was a beloved figure. It just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. The university some people have not gotten over that to this day with the university. And so I suspect they won't repeat that same move, if you will. So it's a situation where I think Penny's the coach as long as he wants to be. But I think for right now, he's also the best coach Memphis could possibly have.
Yeah, he seems like a perfect fit.
Yeah. Yeah, all he's got to do is, it's March. He's got to, and the goal for this team this season has been the last 2 years, they've been playing really well at the end of the year. Last year, they beat Houston in the AAC tournament and won the championship.
Yeah.
2 years ago, they were playing really well at the end of the year. They had to play really well because of how bad they started to get into the tournament. And then, they gave Gonzaga all they could handle in the second round. But the reality was they were in the 8-9 game in the tournament. And it's really hard to get to the second weekend from the 8-9 game. And the goal this season is to better position yourself for like a top 6 seed in the, on Selection Sunday. And I think, frankly, with the makeup of the AAC, to really feel good about that, I think you got to beat both Clemson and Virginia. Like you got to have an overwhelming non-conference resume. And the way to do that is to win these 2 home games. And so that's kind of where, importance wise, that's how important these games are for Memphis.
Yeah. That net rankings thing is, it seems a little rougher than the old RPI system that they used to use. But yeah, you got to have some impressive wins on your resume to to get any respect from the committee come March. That's for sure. Yeah, you're right. That's a huge, not really weekend, but sort of a 4-day span there for the Tigers. It's a big game for Virginia too. That going to be interesting. I know Tony likes to see all kinds of different teams and before the conference schedule really kicks in, and he'll certainly get a diverse look out there at Memphis, and a team that, like you said, that likes to run and likes to pressure, and that's something that they haven't seen a lot of. So it'll probably help serve them well once the ACC play begins and they run into a couple of teams like that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Big game for Virginia as well. And wouldn't hurt their resume either. Probably.
No, I think I think Memphis can be a very good team. Like at the end, they're gonna run through conference play. Like they're gonna have a gaudy conference record, I would suspect. There'll be this will hold up. Certainly a road game. This will hold up as a quad 1 win if Virginia wins it, I would say.
No question. Both ways, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mark, thanks so much for taking some time out of your day. I know you got a lot going on out there, and it was great catching up with you. And thanks for your insight, sharing your insight on the Tigers. I know our listeners will be keenly tuned into this to find out more about Memphis basketball.
No, thank you for having me on. It was good to catch up with you too, because I miss those days on the UVA Virginia Tech beat when I was covering both for the Post. Those were great years.
That was a fun time. Things have thinned out in the media corps since then. So
yeah,
we don't have the connections that we used to. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Always appreciate you, man.
All right, yeah, and congrats on everything, the success with your site and everything. I'm really happy things are rolling for you over at jerryratcliffe.com.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. We'll hopefully we'll run into you sometime on the basketball trail this year.
Well, they're gonna be there next year, so maybe I haven't been to Charlottesville in too long, and I got some family. I think I might try and make it a priority to be in Charlottesville next year. I haven't been in too long. I loved Charlottesville when I was going there a lot. So Memphis they do the return trip next year, so maybe I'll be out there.
I thought that was a home and home. I wasn't sure, but yeah,
it is. Yeah, they'll be in Charlottesville next year.
Great. Well, if we don't see you before then, we'll see you then.
Perfect. Thanks, Hootie.
All right, brother. Thank you so much.